Do you know how the EU is governed? What are the important institutions? How do they work together? You probably only have a vague idea of how it works, and probably know more about the US politics than about European politics. Do you know who the European president is? Trick question, there are around a dozen. In this episode we'll look at how the European government works, but also show many of its flaws. This is not to say that the EU is necessarily ruled poorly, but I will address many of the concerns average citizens have. And I think we can all agree that governments could be run more efficiently in general. Alright, so let's start at the top, the European Council. It is comprised of the 28 chancellors, presidents and prime ministers, who are the heads of state of their own European country. At the council, the European leaders meet 4 times per year to define the EU's policy, to push forward European integration, and to serve as an emergency brake where it can cancel any EU plan if it can convince half the EU leaders to vote against that plan. So to whom does the European Council give direction? To the European Commission. The Commission is responsible for drafting all the laws of the European Union. It is comprised of 28 commissioners, one from each country, who are each in charge of one aspect of European law. There is a Commissioner of Transport, a Commissioner of Regional Policy, a Commissioner of Research, Science and Innovation, and so forth. This way the Commission acts like a cabinet. It's led by a president who is nominated by the European Council and approved by the European Parliament. The other 27 commissioners are chosen by each member country. This way, every member state has 1/28 say in creating the laws of the European Union. Okay, so what happens after the Commission proposes a law? There are 2 options. First, if it concerns mostly policy within the European Union, then it gets sent to the European Parliament to vote on. If the majority votes in favor, the law is adopted. The European Parliament functions much like a national parliament. There are political parties, the people vote for them, and they pass laws. So how are the seats in Parliament determined? Well, every member state gets an amount of seats depending on the population of that country, but each country receives at least 6 seats out of the total of 751 seats. So when there are elections, each country is assigned 6 seats. The remaining 583 are then divided depending on population. Latvia, for example, has 2 million people out of a total European population of 508 million. Latvia thus has 0.4% of the European population, meaning it gets 0.4% of the remaining European Parliament seats, which results in 2 extra seats on top of the guaranteed 6 seats. This is done for every country, and I'll leave this here so you can see how many seats each country currently holds. During elections, you vote for your national party. So let's say a Latvian party receives 50% of the votes, then they get 4 out of the 8 seats in the European Parliament. Those 4 don't sit alone, however, but they form a group with like-minded parties from other countries. I will leave this here if you're interested in the different EU parties and what they generally stand for. But what does the EU Parliament do? The Parliament sets a budget for the EU institutions every year, oversees the other EU institutions and votes on law. But there is a catch. So the Commission proposes a law, it sends that law to the Parliament, and Parliament decides to either pass it or send it back to the Commission with the adjustments they'd like to see. This creates a strange distribution of power. The Commission is the one who creates the law and Parliament is the one who debates the laws and votes on laws. This is different from US or British politics. There you make a law, you defend your own law in Parliament and convince other parliamentarians to vote on your law. This is one of the main reasons why the EU is thought of as undemocratic. The Commission is selected by member countries, not by voters. There are 28 commissioners. So if you're a Slovak, then you didn't get a say in the creation of 27 out of the 28 fields of law in the European Union. This is not to mention that 28 commissioners are simply too many to be effective. On top of that, Parliament continuously fails in bringing the Europeans closer to the European project. Turnout in the European elections is low and falling. Voters tend to decide on national, not on European issues. Far from acting as a parliament that controls spending, it has often behaved more as a lobby group whose main aim seems to be to spend more and augment its own powers. But it's not all bad. For example, the Commission is quite an efficient institution, employing only around 30,000 people. About the same amount as the largest local council in one of the member states. And under the recent leadership of Jean-Claude Juncker, it has sharply reduced the amounts of law it proposes. And the EU parliamentarians are impressively well qualified for improving legislation and questioning the EU Commission. It has passed many groundbreaking laws in the past, such as reducing roaming charges, passing legislation that sets the EU up as a global power, and taking steps towards more gender equality in the EU. Okay, so internal European matters get sent to Parliament. What if it's not an internal matter? Well, if it concerns foreign affairs or requires cooperation between the countries, then it gets sent to the Council of Ministers. ministers. The Council of Ministers is comprised of one minister from each EU country. Depending on what they vote on, there are different ministers present. If you vote on agricultural law, there will only be agricultural ministers. If you vote on matters of finance, there will be 28 finance ministers, and so forth. The Council of Ministers acts as a balance with the European Parliament. Where Parliament is purely a European institution with European goals, the Council of Ministers is comprised of people who have the best interest of their country in mind. Together with Parliament, they get to decide on the EU budget. Then there is the European Court of Auditors, which sees to it that the taxpayers' money is spent efficiently in the EU. There is the European Court of Justice, which is the judicial arm of the European Union. It is comprised of judges from all over the EU. Its role is to see to it that EU laws are applied in all member states and to settle legal matters between institutions and countries. It is the highest court in the European Union. The last institutions to mention are the European Central Bank and the Eurogroup. We will get into the next episode when we talk about the Euro and the Euro crisis. Then there are the major inefficiencies in the European Union. For example, the European Parliament moves between Brussels and Strasbourg every month, costing 114 million euros every year. There's also the Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of Regions. They bring together trade unions and civil representatives for monthly meetings to advise the Council of Ministers. They cost about 200 million euro every year, but nobody would miss them if they were to disappear tomorrow. Lastly, all the institutions just mentioned are spread over Brussels, Luxembourg, Strasbourg and Frankfurt, as well as several other European cities. This was done to assure that not one country can lead the EU by having all the European institutions in their country. But as a result, it means that you can't communicate properly, so EU officials have to move between cities a lot. And this explains how the European Union works within itself. There are also countries outside the EU who want access to the vast European market, but don't want to adhere to all the EU legislations, notably fishing regulations for Norway and Iceland, and banking regulations for Switzerland. They are part of the European Economic Area and Schengen, meaning that they can trade freely with EU countries and you can move between them, never realizing you left the European Union. But these countries don't have any say in their rules, meaning that if the Schengen or EEA treaties are changed, they can either sign the treaty or leave. So here you have it, a complete, broad overview of the important institutions and how they work. Next week, we'll delve into the Euro and the Euro crisis. If you like this episode, press the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. This video was made in collaboration with My Country Europe. If you want to show your support for Europe, head over to their page by clicking here and see what they are doing.